The rain didn't just fall that night, it felt like the sky was weeping, hammering again. The rusted metal of the dumpster with a violence that drowned out the city's usual hum. Lucas, a man whose back was bent from years of carrying the weight of the world and whose hands were permanently stained with the grease of an auto shop that barely paid minimum wage, was taking out the trash behind the diner where he worked his second shift. He was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weary that sleep couldn't fix, grieving a wife he had lost 2 years prior and a life that seemed determined to crush him. He tossed the black bag over the rim, the plastic slick with rain, and turned to head back into the warmth of the kitchen when a sound stopped him dead in his tracks. It wasn't a cat and it wasn't the wind. It was a cry, thin, ragged, and terrified, coming from a cardboard box tucked behind a stack of rotting pallets near the alley's exit. Heart pounding against his ribs, Lucas moved the debris aside, his flashlight beam cutting through the downpour until it landed on a bundle of soaked blankets. He peeled back the wet fabric, and there, shivering and blue-lipped, was a baby girl, no more than 6 months old, looking up at him with eyes that held the terrified silence of the abandoned. But before we dive deeper into this story of sacrifice and destiny, if you believe that every child deserves a home and that kindness can change the world, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the soul. Your support helps us spread hope. Lucas didn't think about the law, the police, or his bank account that currently held less than $40. He only thought about the cold. He scooped the box up, shielding the infant with his oversized fraying jacket, and ran to his beat-up Ford truck. The heater rattled to life, blowing dust and lukewarm air, but it was enough. As the baby's shivering subsided and her cries turned into soft whimpers, Lucas looked at her. She had nothing, no note, no name, just a small, distinctive strawberry-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. He knew he should drive to the precinct, but a fierce, protective instinct roared to life within him. The foster system had chewed him up as a boy, and he couldn't bear the thought of this fragile life becoming a case number in a stack of files. He named her Sarah after his late mother, and that night, in his cramped, drafty studio apartment, he made a silent vow to God. He promised that as long as there was breath in his lungs, she would never know what it felt like to be unwanted again. He didn't know he had just adopted the heir to a billion-dollar dynasty. He only knew he was a father again. The years that followed were a blur of beautiful struggle and exhausting labor. Lucas gave up his second shift at the diner to be home in the evenings, picking up odd jobs in construction and landscaping to make ends meet. He became a master of stretching a dollar, mixing water into the milk to make it last a day longer, and sewing patches onto Sarah's clothes with hands that were clumsy but gentle. Sarah grew up thinking that richness was measured in time, not money. She didn't know that Lucas often skipped dinner so she could have a second helping, or that the camping trips they took in the living room with blankets over chairs were because he couldn't afford to turn up the heat during the brutal winters. She only knew that her father was her hero, a giant of a man who smelled like pine and motor oil, and who read to her every single night, his deep voice chasing away the nightmares. They were a team, a fortress of two against a world that looked down on them. Sarah was a bright light in the dimness of Lucas's life. By the time she was 5, she possessed a grace that seemed out of place in their rough neighborhood. She was polite to a fault, possessed a vocabulary that surprised his construction buddies, and had a smile that could disarm the angriest landlord. But there were hard days, too. Lucas lived in constant, low-level fear that someone would ask for a birth certificate he didn't have, or that social services would knock on the door and see the peeling paint and the empty refrigerator. He kept to himself, moving towns whenever people got too curious, living entirely off the grid. It was a lonely life for him, but for Sarah, it was an adventure. He taught her that family wasn't blood. It was who stayed when the rain started falling. He didn't know that miles away, in a mansion that felt like a mausoleum, a woman named Isabella Sterling was lighting a candle for the 5th year in a row, staring at a portrait of a baby girl who had vanished during a chaotic kidnapping attempt that had gone cold, leaving a hole in her heart that no amount of money could fill. The turning point came on a Tuesday in November, just after Sarah turned 6. The economy had taken a downturn, and the construction site where Lucas worked shut down, leaving him unemployed. The panic was immediate and suffocating. He had rent due in 3 days and exactly $12 in his pocket. To make matters worse, Sarah had developed a persistent, rattling cough that kept them both up at night. Desperate, Lucas went to a free clinic in the city, holding a feverish Sarah against his chest in the crowded waiting room. The television in the corner was blaring the midday news, usually just background noise, but something caught his ear. The anchor was speaking in a somber tone about the anniversary of the Sterling disappearance. Lucas looked up, exhausted, his eyes scanning the screen. They flashed a picture of a baby, followed by an age progression photo created by forensic artists. The image on the screen was Sarah. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was her. The same wide eyes, the same button nose, the same distinctive curl of the hair. Lucas felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him dizzy. The world tilted on its axis. He pulled Sarah tighter, his heart hammering against her feverish back. The news report continued, mentioning a reward of $5 million for information, leading to the return of Isabella Sterling, heir to the Sterling tech empire. $5 million. It was an amount Lucas couldn't even comprehend. But it wasn't the money that made him sick. It was the realization that he was the villain in someone else's story. He had stolen, or at least kept, a mother's child. He had raised a princess in a pauper's shack. Guilt, sharp and agonizing, sliced through him. He looked at Sarah, who was dozing against his shoulder, a thumb near her mouth. She was happy. She was loved. But she wasn't his. He had saved her from the dumpster, yes, but by keeping her, was he denying her a life of comfort, safety, and opportunity? If he came forward now, they would arrest him. They would say he kidnapped her. He would go to prison, and Sarah Isabella would be terrified, ripped away from the only father she knew. The drive back to their apartment was a blur of tears and terror. Lucas packed their few belongings, his hands shaking. His instinct was to run, to flee to another state, to change her hair color, to hide her away where the Sterling family could never find them. He loved her too much to lose her. He sat on the edge of her sagging mattress, watching her sleep, and wept. He cried for the wife he missed, for the unfairness of life, and for the impossible choice before him. But as the sun began to rise, painting the gray city in hues of soft pink, Lucas looked at the mold in the corner of the ceiling and the drafty window taped up with plastic. He looked at Sarah's worn-out shoes by the door. If he truly loved her, he had to put her first. He couldn't force her to live a life of hiding and poverty when she belonged in a castle. He realized that a parent's job isn't just to hold on. Sometimes the hardest and most important part of love is letting go. Lay with a resolve that felt like dying, Lucas dressed Sarah in her Sunday best dress he had found at a thrift store that she loved because it had lace on the collar. He put on his only suit, the one he had worn to his wife's funeral, which was now tight across the shoulders and frayed at the cuffs. He shaved, combed his hair, and told Sarah they were going on a special adventure to meet some very nice people. He drove for 4 hours to the outskirts of the city, to the wealthy enclave where the Sterlings lived. The truck stood out like a sore thumb against the pristine landscaping and the luxury sedans gliding by. When they reached the massive iron gates of the Sterling estate, Lucas almost turned back. His hands were gripping the steering wheel, so hard his knuckles were white. But he looked at Sarah, who was humming a song he had taught her, and he pressed the intercom button. The confrontation at the gate was humiliating. Security guards with earpieces looked at his battered truck with suspicion, ready to turn him away. Lucas had to beg, his voice cracking, showing them the birthmark on Sarah's shoulder through the window, pleading just to speak to Eleanor Sterling. It took an hour, but eventually the heavy gates swung open. Driving up the long, winding driveway felt like driving to his own execution. He parked in front of a house that was bigger than the entire apartment complex he lived in. The front doors opened, and a couple emerged. Robert Sterling looked skeptical and angry, but Eleanor looked like a woman walking in a dream. She stopped halfway down the steps, her eyes locking onto the little girl holding the hand of the rough-looking man in the cheap suit. Lucas knelt down in front of Sarah on the gravel driveway. "Listen to me, baby girl," he said, his voice trembling as he cupped her face. "These people, they are your family. They lost you a long time ago, and they have been looking for you every single day. I found you and I took care of you, but you belong here." Sarah looked confused, tears welling in her eyes. "But you're my daddy," she whispered, clinging to his jacket. "I don't want to stay." The sound of her distress almost broke him, but he forced a smile. "I'll always be your daddy, Sarah. Always. But you have to be brave for me now. Can you be brave?" He stood up, gently unpeeled her fingers from his coat, and nudged her toward the weeping woman. Eleanor Sterling fell to her knees, disregarding the gravel, and when she saw the strawberry birthmark, a scream of pure Agonizing joy tore from her throat. She gathered the child into her arms, sobbing, rocking her back and forth. Robert joined them, wrapping his arms around them both, a broken family finally made whole. Lucas stood apart, a spectator to a miracle he had facilitated but could not be part of. He felt cold, exposed, and utterly alone. He waited for the police sirens, for the handcuffs, for the accusation. He watched them for a long minute, etching the image of Sarah's safety into his mind, and then he turned around. He walked back to his truck, his footsteps heavy. He had done the right thing. He had returned the princess to her kingdom. Now, he had to go back to the dock. Leahy had his hand on the door handle of his truck when a voice rang out. Wait, it was Robert Sterling. The powerful CEO was running across the driveway, not with anger, but with an intensity Lucas couldn't place. Lucas braced himself. I didn't steal her, Lucas said quickly, his hands up in surrender. I found her in a dumpster. I couldn't leave her there. I know I should have called the police. I know I broke the law, but I loved her. I just loved her. Robert stopped a few feet away, breathless. He looked at Lucas, really looked at him. He saw the frayed cuffs, the weary eyes, the calloused hands that had clearly worked themselves to the bone. He looked back at his daughter, who was calm now, pointing at Lucas and telling her mother that Daddy makes the best pancakes. Robert Sterling didn't call the police. Instead, he did something that shocked Lucas to his core. He extended his hand. You didn't steal her, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. You saved her. The police told us she was likely dead. We had funerals. We had empty birthdays. You gave her a life. I looked at her, sir. She is healthy. She is polite. She is happy. That didn't happen by accident. That happened because of you. Eleanor was walking over now, holding Sarah's hand tightly, but Sarah was pulling her toward Lucas. Daddy, she cried out, breaking free and running to slam into Lucas's legs. Lucas caught her, burying his face in her hair one last time. Likely, please, Eleanor said, wiping her tears. Don't leave. We have missed 5 years of her life. We don't know her favorite color. We don't know what makes her laugh. We don't know how to soothe her when she cries. You do. You are her father in every way that matters. Lucas looked at them, confused. I don't have anywhere to go, he admitted, his pride finally shattering. I lost my job. I lost my apartment to bring her here. I have nothing. Robert shook his head firmly. You had everything, he corrected. You have us. We have a guest house on the property. It's yours. I have a fleet of cars that need a head mechanic. The job is yours. We aren't taking her away from you, Lucas. We are asking if we can share her. If this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to comment "Love saves lives" below. Let's show the world that kindness still wins. Lucas stayed. He didn't just stay, he became the glue that helped the Sterlings reconnect with their daughter. It wasn't easy at first. The worlds of the ultra-rich and the working poor collided in strange ways, but the love for the little girl bridged every gap. Lucas moved into the guest cottage, which was nicer than any home he had ever dreamed of. But he spent his evenings in the main house sitting on the floor with billionaires, playing board games and reading bedtime stories. He taught Robert how to fix an engine, and Robert taught him that it was okay to accept help. Sarah, who decided to keep the name Sarah Isabella, grew up with 2 fathers, one who could give her the world, and one who had given her his world when she had nothing. Years later, on Sarah's wedding day, both men walked her down the aisle. The church was filled with the city's elite, cameras flashing, diamonds sparkling. But when the priest asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Robert and Lucas looked at each other. They smiled, a silent acknowledgement of the rainy night that had started it all and the grace that had seen them through. Together, in unison, they said, "We do." And as Sarah danced with Lucas for the father-daughter dance, she whispered in his ear, "Thank you for checking the box, Daddy." Lucas held her tight, tears streaming down his face, grateful that the worst night of his life had turned into the most beautiful destiny he could have ever imagined. But before you go, I have a special request. Comment the name of the person who has been a father figure to you, whether related by blood or not. Let's honor them today.